Scientists working in auditory neurobiology have a name for what you're experiencing right now. They call it cellular starvation of the auditory nerve. And once you truly understand what that means, your entire perception of tinnitus shifts. Because what you think is just ringing in the ears is not random. It is not harmless. And in many cases, it is not permanent either. Imagine this for a moment. 6 weeks from today, you could be sitting in a quiet room and actually experiencing silence. Not because of masking sounds, not because of distraction, but because the constant ringing that has followed you for months, or even years, has finally softened or disappeared. But here is the truth most people never hear. That outcome does not come from a single magic pill. It comes from rebuilding the biological support system of your auditory nerve. Right now, though, your reality might look very different. You wake up at 3 a.m., and it's already there, that high-pitched tone, that low hum, or that strange clicking sound no one else can hear. You turn on a fan. You rely on white noise just to function. You adapt your life around a sound that shouldn't be there. And here's the part that matters most. There is one critical mistake that can make everything I'm about to explain completely useless. I will reveal it later, but first, you need to understand what is actually happening inside your body. I'm Dr. Adewale, and I've spent over 20 years studying the intersection of neurological function and nutritional science. What I'm going to show you is a structured system, 8 key biological factors that research consistently links to auditory nerve support and repair. I call them the 8 silencers. This is not an overnight fix. That needs to be clear. But in clinical observations and research-backed protocols, people often report the first noticeable reduction in symptoms between week 3 and week 6 when consistency is maintained. Now let's begin with the most commonly depleted nutrient in people experiencing tinnitus, and arguably one of the most important. Think of your inner ear like a highly sensitive city at the end of a microscopic pipeline. That pipeline is called the labyrinthine artery, and it is one of the smallest blood vessels in the entire human body. Because it is so narrow, even slight inflammation or changes in blood flow can reduce oxygen delivery to the cochlea, the structure responsible for translating vibration into sound. When those hair cells inside the cochlea don't receive enough oxygen, they don't simply shut down, they begin to misfire. And those misfires? Your brain interprets them as sound. One of the key nutrients involved in stabilizing this system is zinc. Zinc acts as a primary antioxidant defense for the inner ear. It helps neutralize free radicals, unstable molecules that damage delicate hair cells from within. When zinc levels drop, oxidative stress increases, and those cells begin to deteriorate at a microscopic level. Over time, this leads to abnormal electrical signaling, which your brain translates as ringing, buzzing, or humming. Food sources of zinc include oysters, pumpkin seeds, and grass-fed beef. Even something as simple as 2 tablespoons of pumpkin seeds daily can provide a meaningful portion of your daily requirement. You can sprinkle them on meals, add them to breakfast, or eat them as a snack. If supplementation is needed, forms like zinc bisglycinate or zinc picolinate are generally better absorbed. Typical supportive ranges are between 25–40 milligrams per day, but this should always be discussed with a healthcare provider because excessive zinc can interfere with copper balance. And here is something most people never realize. Zinc deficiency is extremely common, especially in adults over 50. In fact, a significant portion of people are walking around deficient without ever knowing it, because standard blood tests often don't detect functional deficiency, which means the very nutrient your auditory system depends on might already be running low, and your brain is compensating in the only way it can, by creating sound where there is none. Now, what happens next inside the auditory nerve is even more critical, and it starts with a completely different nutrient. What happens next inside your auditory system goes deeper than most people ever realize. Because the problem is not only about oxygen or blood flow, it is also about how your brain transmits sound signals in the first place. Your auditory nerve is wrapped in a protective coating called the myelin sheath. Think of it like insulation around an electrical wire. When that insulation is strong and intact, electrical signals travel smoothly from your inner ear to your brain without distortion. But when that coating starts to break down, the system becomes unstable. And that is where things change. Because now, instead of clean signals, your nervous system begins producing irregular electrical activity. Small, short circuits start forming, and your brain, trying to make sense of this chaos, interprets it as sound. That sound is what you experience as tinnitus. One of the most important nutrients involved in protecting and rebuilding that myelin sheath is vitamin B12. B12 is essential for nerve repair and signal stability. Without enough of it, the insulation around your auditory nerve weakens over time, and the system becomes increasingly sensitive and reactive. But here is where most people get misled. Standard blood tests often show normal B12 levels, yet symptoms still exist. Why? Because the normal lab range is not always the same as the optimal range for nerve regeneration. You can be technically within range and still not have enough B12 to support proper myelin repair. That gap is one of the most overlooked issues in chronic tinnitus cases. Research published in medical journals of otology has shown that in individuals with noise-related tinnitus, B12 supplementation over 8 to 12 weeks led to measurable improvements in symptom intensity for many participants. The form also matters significantly. The most bioactive version is methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin. Methylcobalamin is the form your nervous system can directly use for repair processes. For those who cannot test immediately, a common supportive dose used in research settings is around 1,000 micrograms per day, typically taken sublingually for better absorption. Dietary sources include wild salmon, sardines, eggs, and beef liver. However, even with a good diet, absorption issues can still occur, and that is an important detail, because certain medications like metformin or acid-reducing drugs can significantly reduce B12 absorption in the gut. So even if intake is adequate, the nervous system may still be deprived. Now, here is something important to understand emotionally and biologically. Many people try B12 once and say, it didn't work. But nerve repair does not work like an instant switch. It is a slow biological rebuilding process, not a quick correction. And more importantly, B12 alone is not enough. This is not a single nutrient problem. It is a system. Each element supports the next. And that brings us to the next critical factor in auditory stability, one that most people overlook entirely because they associate it with stress rather than hearing. Because stress is not just mental, it is neurological chemistry. When your body is under stress, even from lack of sleep, emotional pressure, or even loud environments, your brain releases a neurotransmitter called glutamate. Glutamate is the nervous system's accelerator. In controlled amounts, it is essential for brain function. But in excess, it becomes harmful. It overstimulates auditory neurons, forcing them into a constant state of firing. This means your auditory system never fully rests. And when neurons don't rest, they begin to misfire. Now the brain is receiving constant, unnecessary signals. And again, it interprets them as sound. This is where magnesium becomes essential. Magnesium acts as the biological brake system. It helps regulate overactive neural firing by blocking specific receptors in the brain involved in glutamate overload. Without enough magnesium, the auditory system can remain in a hyperactive state for long periods, especially during stress. Some research has even shown that magnesium deficiency can increase susceptibility to noise-induced auditory damage. This is why many people notice something interesting. On stressful days, or days with poor sleep, the ringing often feels louder. That is not coincidence, it is neurochemistry. Magnesium-rich foods include spinach, leafy greens, and dark chocolate with high cocoa content. Supplement forms like magnesium glycinate are often used for nervous system support. And timing matters. Many protocols suggest taking magnesium in the evening because it also supports sleep quality, which is when nerve repair processes become most active. So now we have two layers. Structural repair through B12, neural regulation through magnesium, but the system is still incomplete because the auditory nerve does not only depend on signaling and insulation, it also depends on inflammation control and hormonal regulation. And that is where the next nutrient becomes critical. Up to this point, you've seen how tinnitus is not just a sound problem. It is a breakdown in nerve signaling, insulation, and neural balance. But there is another layer most people completely ignore. Because even if your nerve signaling is corrected, and even if your myelin begins to repair, the system can still remain unstable if inflammation and hormonal regulation are out of balance. And one of the most powerful regulators of that system is something people still think of as just a vitamin. That nutrient is vitamin D3. But in reality, vitamin D3 behaves far more like a hormone than a vitamin. It doesn't just support bone health, it influences gene expression across multiple systems in the body. including the nervous system. And yes, that includes the auditory pathway. Inside the inner ear, there are specialized cells called cochlear hair cells. These are the microscopic structures responsible for converting sound vibrations into electrical signals that your brain can interpret. When these cells are exposed to oxidative stress or chronic inflammation, they become vulnerable. And when they become damaged, they can begin sending distorted signals. Your brain does not recognize those distorted signals as damage. It interprets them as sound. Now here is where vitamin D3 becomes important. Research published in otology and neurotology journals has found that individuals with chronic tinnitus often show lower serum levels of vitamin D3 compared to individuals without symptoms. And when supplementation was introduced in deficient individuals, many showed measurable improvements in symptom severity over time. The mechanism appears to work in two key ways. First, vitamin D3 helps reduce systemic inflammation. This improves microcirculation, especially in extremely small vessels like the labyrinthine artery that supplies the cochlea. Better circulation means better oxygen delivery, and better oxygen delivery means more stable hair cell function. Second, vitamin D3 plays a role in regulating calcium channels inside cochlear cells. These calcium channels are directly involved in how auditory signals are generated. When calcium regulation becomes unstable, hair cells can become overactive or misfire. And again, the brain interprets that misfiring as sound. But here is something critical. Vitamin D3 is extremely difficult to obtain in therapeutic amounts from food alone. Even fatty fish like salmon or sardines, while beneficial, usually do not provide enough on their own for individuals with deficiency. That is why supplementation is often used in clinical protocols. Common research-supported ranges fall between 2,000 to 5,000 IU per day, typically taken with a fat-containing meal because vitamin D3 is fat-soluble. But there is another important partner nutrient here, vitamin K2. K2 helps direct calcium into the bones where it belongs and prevents it from depositing in soft tissues where it can contribute to dysfunction. When D3 and K2 are taken together, they form a synergistic system. D3 regulates inflammation and immune signaling, while K2 ensures mineral balance is properly directed. This pairing is one of the most important nutritional combinations for long-term nervous system stability. Now, let's move deeper, because even with inflammation controlled and nerve signaling stabilized, the auditory system still depends heavily on the physical structure of its cells. And that structure is made of fats, specifically omega-3 fatty acids. Inside the cochlea, hair cell membranes are largely composed of DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. This fatty acid determines how flexible and responsive those cell membranes are. When omega-3 levels are low, those membranes become rigid. And when they become rigid, they lose sensitivity to subtle sound vibrations. But there is another critical effect. Omega-3s also reduce blood viscosity. In simple terms, they make blood flow more smoothly. Why does that matter? Because remember that labyrinthine artery, the microscopic vessel supplying the inner ear. Even a small improvement in blood flow can significantly enhance oxygen delivery to those fragile hair cells. And when oxygen delivery improves, cellular stress decreases. A meta-analysis of multiple clinical trials has suggested that regular omega-3 intake may support reduced age-related hearing decline in certain populations. Food sources include salmon, mackerel, sardines, and herring. Supplement forms often provide DHA and EPA together in concentrated doses. But consistency is key. These nutrients do not work like painkillers. They accumulate in cell membranes over time. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, if I take all of this, will it work faster? What if I 1, 1, 1, 1, 1? And that is exactly where most people make a critical mistake. Because more is not better, and timing is everything. In the next part, I am going to show you the hidden barriers that silently block all of this progress, even when you are doing everything right. And one of them might already be in your daily routine without you realizing it. At this stage, you might assume the biggest challenge is simply getting enough nutrients into your body. But that's only half the story, because in many cases, people are already taking the right nutrients, yet nothing changes. And the reason is not what they're taking. It's what is silently blocking absorption. Let's start with something most people never connect to hearing health: caffeine and dietary compounds that interfere with mineral uptake. Caffeine, especially in higher daily amounts, increases urinary excretion of key minerals like zinc. That means your body is literally flushing out one of the most important nutrients for auditory nerve stability faster than you can replace it. And zinc, as you already know, is essential for protecting cochlear hair cells from oxidative damage. Now combine that with another hidden blocker, phytates. Phytates are naturally occurring compounds found in many grains and cereals. On their own, they are not harmful. But in the digestive system, they bind to minerals like zinc and prevent proper absorption. So even if your diet looks healthy, your body may still be undersupplied. This is where timing becomes critical. If you consume coffee or caffeine regularly, taking zinc at the same time significantly reduces its effectiveness. The same applies to high phytate meals, like unsoaked oats or processed grains. A simple adjustment spacing zinc supplementation or zinc-rich meals at least 90 minutes away from caffeine can dramatically improve absorption. Small change, big biological difference. Now let's move to something even more important, because in some cases, the issue is not nutrition at all. It is medication. Certain commonly used medications have ototoxic potential, meaning they can negatively affect inner ear structures over time. One of the most widely used is aspirin. At high or consistent daily doses, aspirin has been shown in research to reduce cochlear blood flow and affect outer hair cell function in the inner ear. Other medications that may carry similar risks in certain contexts include high-dose ibuprofen, specific diuretics, and some antibiotics. Now, this is not a message to stop any prescribed treatment. That would be dangerous and incorrect. But it is a reminder that your auditory system is extremely sensitive, and long-term exposure to certain compounds can influence its function. This is why a very specific conversation with your doctor becomes important. A simple question like, are any of my current medications known to affect hearing or tinnitus? Can open a door to adjustments you may not have been aware of. Because sometimes, improvement is not about adding more. It is about removing what is interfering. Now let's bring everything together. By this point, you have seen how tinnitus is influenced by multiple overlapping systems. Zinc, supporting cellular protection. B12, maintaining nerve insulation. Magnesium, regulating neural overactivity. Vitamin D3, controlling inflammation and signaling. Omega-3, improving membrane flexibility and blood flow. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Even if all of this is correct, even if you follow everything perfectly, there is still one mistake that causes most people to fail, and that mistake is starting everything at once. When multiple supplements are introduced simultaneously, they compete for absorption pathways in the gut. Zinc competes with copper. Magnesium interacts with calcium balance. Fat-soluble vitamins require proper sequencing for absorption efficiency. So instead of improvement, you get confusion at the metabolic level, and the system never stabilizes. Here is what actually works based on structured nutritional protocols. Weeks 1, 2. Start with zinc and magnesium only, nothing else. Let the nervous system stabilize. Weeks 3, 4. Add B12 and vitamin D3. Now the nerve repair system can begin functioning more efficiently. Week 5, onward. Introduce omega-3 fatty acids to support membrane repair and circulation. And throughout the entire process, keep caffeine and mineral timing separated. Now here is the final truth. This approach does not produce instant silence. It produces gradual reduction. For some people, improvements begin in 3 to 6 weeks. Softer ringing, longer quiet moments, fewer spikes. But only if consistency is maintained. And that is where most people fail, not in knowledge, but in patience. Because the auditory nerve does not repair in hours. It repairs in cycles. Slowly, steadily, biologically. Now, here is what I want you to do next. First, don't guess your nutritional status. Get it tested. Ask your doctor for vitamin B12 and vitamin D3 blood tests at your next appointment. Second, if you choose to begin, start only with zinc and magnesium this week. Keep it simple. Keep it structured. Third, and most importantly, stay consistent for at least 6 weeks before judging results. That is the minimum window where meaningful change typically begins. And if this helped you understand what is actually happening inside your auditory system, then don't stop here. Subscribe to the channel, because in the next video, I'm going to break down the difference between normal and optimal B12 levels, and why that single difference explains why most tinnitus treatments fail. Also, If you found value in this, like this video so it can reach others who have been told there is nothing they can do. Because there is something, and now you understand it. Take care of your hearing, and I'll see you in the next video.